Hello and welcome to the Payoff Pitch Podcast, Action Network's Major League Baseball betting podcast. I'm Sean Zerillo, and we're back today for another divisional preview. Today I'm joined by one of the OGs of Payoff Pitch, my former baseball editor, Colin Woodchurch. We had to get him back here to break down the AL Central and his Chicago White Sox. Colin, how you doing today?
I'm doing great, Sean. It's great to be back on the show, although I am a little bit offended, you and our producers. I feel like every time we want to shit all over the White Sox, we call on me, the sad, pathetic White Sox fan. I feel like it happened last year when I guessed it on the pod a little bit. They're the worst team in baseball. They're pathetic. I had to sport my White Sox hat for our YouTube viewers today just so that everyone knows, even if they're on mute for some reason, how sad and pathetic my life is right now. But I'm excited to break down this team that won 41 games last year. I'm excited to break down all of their rivals who I hate, which maybe it's maybe a positive or a negative when it comes to my actual analysis of them. But yeah, it's obviously great to be back here, ready for some baseball.
You're a victim of timing. Unfortunately, when you first started, or fortunately, when you first started at Action Network, the White Sox were actually good and competitive and interesting, and now they are amongst the dregs of baseball. And without further ado, we are going to jump into the White Sox and kick this division worst to first, a little bit differently than our other divisional previews. But first, let's get some housekeeping out of the way. We're going to have our 2025 player prop and long shots episodes in mid-March. We're going to dive into the series preview for the Tokyo series in Japan. We're going to get there first, but don't miss all of our divisional previews like this one. We'll be breaking down each of MLB's 6 divisions over the next couple weeks. New pod in your feed every Monday morning, Monday through Thursday. You don't want to miss all of our betting coverage, so make sure to subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen to your podcast. Also give us that 5-star rating and review. We don't care what feedback you leave, so long as you leave us 5 stars. We're going to jump, as I said, to the bottom of this division since Colin is here and talk about his Chicago White Sox. I told him before the podcast, it should be illegal for bookmakers to allow you to bet on the White Sox to win the division this season. 250-1, the listed odds. I'd have to pull up my composite projection, but I think I probably make it closer to 999-1, like 0.1%. I'm sure is what one projection system put out there, and then you divide that by 5. And you're getting to the hundreds of or the thousands of percentile points in terms of their chances. But they won 41 games last year. Pythagorean win expectation of 48 wins. I'm at 53.5 for this team this year. That is right in line with their over-under. They opened at 51.5 and got bet up because all the public projections out there like this team to win at least 60 games this year, between 60 and 65.8. Their projected public projections. Colin, I know you mentioned on one of our preseason meetings for Action Network MLB that you thought there was a chance this White Sox team could be worse than the team that won 41 games last year. I think your opinion has maybe changed a little bit, seeing some additions to the roster. Obviously, they traded away Garrett Crochet over the winter, but you actually see the needle pointing up maybe slightly for the White Sox in 2025. And the reason we're talking about this team first, them winning only 41 games last year enabled 3 teams from their division to make the playoffs. So what do you see from the White Sox in 2025?
Yeah, I mean, I think objectively it's easy to say that this team on paper is worse than the team that won 41 games last year. Like, from a talent standpoint, it is a worse team. They traded away Garrett Crochet. Again, some of these kind of more high upside veterans that they had been relying on for the last couple of years are no longer here. They're not starting the year with Eloy Jimenez. They're not starting the year with Yohan Moncada. People with who have shown success in the majors before. Obviously, their lack of ability to develop into stars are why the White Sox are here in the first place, but they don't have those players anymore. And so, yeah, you're looking at the White Sox hitting their over on their win projection means they have to improve by 13 wins this year, which seems insane. But there's a pathway to this team being better. Some of it is luck-based. As you mentioned, their Pythag was 7 wins higher than their actual win total last year. But one of the aspects of this year's team, it's almost somewhat refreshing that they are no longer beholden to underperforming top line options anymore. Last year, they were kind of force feeding these guys who, were promised these roles, and they were underperforming day after day, week after week, and they stayed there. That's not going to be the case this year. They can actually act like a true rebuilding team this year instead of a team with terrible veterans going through the motions. They have Josh Rojas this year. If Josh Rojas is bad, well, let's try Chase Meadroth. Let's try Brooks Baldwin. They can roster churn, which is exactly what a team like this needs to do. Miguel Vargas, they're relying on third base this year. Maybe Miguel Vargas hits like he did after they acquired him last year. Okay, let's try Brian Ramos, who has a lot of upside as a rookie. They can churn. They can try all of these different things that they weren't able to try last year or refused to try last year. And that part of that is another aspect in the positive, which is they should have competent managing. Pedro Grifol might go down as the worst manager in Major League history. You know, from a wins-loss perspective, I think that's irrefutable. You know, from a subjective standpoint, you know, people can have their own opinions, but Will Venable obviously has spent a lot of time next to some very talented, very successful managers. He was on Joe Maddon's staff for a long time in Chicago. He obviously has stood next to Bruce Bochy for the last several years down in Arlington. And just from like a nuts and bolts standpoint, it's really sad and pathetic to even like have to point this out, but they are finally acting like a major league organization behind the scenes. They're finally like incorporating fielding data into their like analysis of players and teams. They're doing actual scouting data collection, storage, and dissemination across the org. The past iterations of the White Sox kind of acted like a company that had 15 different departments, and none of those departments talked to each other. So they had this analysis, and this department had it, and then this other department had different analysis. They didn't talk to each other. That's not the case anymore. It's insane that here in the year 2025, they're finally starting to act like a real organization. There was a report out there from my good friend James Fegan, formerly of The Athletic, now with Sox Machine, about how last year they were the only team that didn't have their data on Google Cloud. So they have that now. And yeah, from an on-field perspective, like I said, a little bit of luck. Their bullpen, their blown save luck was like insanely bad last year. Luis Robert could get back to being like a 4 to 6 win player, you know, even if it's for 2 to 3 months before they trade him. And maybe they get a full year of second half Andrew Benintendi. Obviously, he's going to start the year a little banged up with a wrist injury. It's not like a muscle thing, which is good. It's just a broken bone that needs to heal. And in the second half of last year, Andrew Benintendi was really good. Miguel Vargas came over from the Dodgers last year and forgot how to hit. There were reports out there that like he was so beholden to like the Dodgers like nutritional planning that he came to Chicago and like wasn't eating all of a sudden, or you know, just like he gained a bunch of weight this offseason. He's got a good nutrition plan. Maybe he goes back to being that top prospect that he was in Los Angeles once upon a time. That was a lot of talking to say, yeah, over 53.5 is reasonable. I do not think this team is going to be good. I think they're going to be like regular bad this year instead of historic bad. And one other thing I wanted to mention before I let you go is, you know, there's the worst record market, which everyone talks about a lot. And I'm curious your thoughts on this, especially as someone who is right in line with the win total. The White Sox are sitting around minus 200 right now for worst record. And I think the next best odds are the Rockies, who are around plus 200. I think if I'm looking at the worst record market, there's value in those other bad teams like the Rockies in particular. We're not talking NL West today, obviously. But I wonder, as someone who projects them around 53.5 wins, in addition to everything else you are projecting with this team, is there value in them in the worst record market, or is that a stay away for you?
It's a stay away for me personally, but if you look at the other public projection systems out there, there are some that have the Rockies finishing ahead of the White Sox. As I said, every public projection system, and when I say public projection systems, I'm talking Pacoda, Fangraphs, Davenport, and then all the other systems you can find on Fangraphs playoff odds page, BatX, Zips, ATC, Oopsie, etc. Oopsie, the new of them, which incorporates more batted ball and pitch modeling metrics. So I actually like Oopsie a lot. It's giving a little bit more outlier numbers on those projections. But yeah, to your point, Colin, there are several projection systems that have teams finishing ahead of the White Sox this season. So in terms of taking a different team in the loss leader market, I think the Rockies are the team you could justify based on the other projections out there. I think the Rockies actually have some decent pieces. I also talked about in my team preview The Rockies win 45% of their home games every year on accident. It's very difficult for teams to go in there, go into Coors Field, especially the first game of a series, and win a high percentage of games there because it's such an awkward environment that leads to high variance contests. And as a result, they only need to win like 28% of their road games in order to clear their total. But I still think the Rockies are, a potential disaster. The Marlins have some interesting pitching. The lineup, though, doesn't have any hitters that scare me. Anthony DeBundo and I ran through their lineup yesterday when we went through our NL East preview. So, yeah, I think, if you want to bet on the White Sox this season, you're either fading other teams in the AL Central, or you could pick another team to lead the league in losses. I think that's how I'd attack Chicago because, again, I'm in line with their win total at 53.5. I am the low man in the market by over 6.5 wins. I just view them as a very bad defensive team with a very bad bullpen and a lot of pieces who they're going to be trying out, giving tryouts at the major league level. Cuban prospects, Kyle Teal, who they just traded for. Listen to a lot of prospect prognostication stuff over the winter. Found it very interesting that the White Sox have chosen to just attack the Cuban market in terms of international free agents. They're not really going out and spending big in the DR or in Venezuela or in other countries. And as a result, they're just kind of subject to whatever talent does come out of Cuba. So they need to sort of renew their process of getting relationships built in these other countries where they can sign international free agents. Maybe the international draft gets instituted at some point and sort of levels the playing field for some of these teams who just have these relationships built up with a lot of these young guys in these countries that they end up signing. But it's pass for me on the White Sox this year. As we go through the other teams, you'll see I'm kind of dependent on the White Sox getting close to 60 wins, at least winning more than 50 games in order to get some of these other teams in the division under, because last year the White Sox got absolutely dominated within their own division. I believe the Royals went 12-1 against them. I just want to pull up the in-division schedule from last year because it is such an influence on how the rest of the division is going to do. The Royals went 12-1. The Twins went 12-1. The Tigers went 10-3, and the Guardians went 8-5 against the White Sox. If the White Sox win at least 50 games, I think a couple of those other teams can miss the playoffs, probably one playoff team. If the White Sox win 40 games again, they could get 3 teams in the playoffs again. So the White Sox kind of, hold the cards a little bit in the AL Central in terms of how many teams can actually make it into the playoffs. Colin, before we move on from your team, any other thoughts here?
Yeah, I will say, speaking about the international spending, that is among the many things that they have changed to become a real major league organization. Is they do have a new international scouting director as of like a year ago, so they are starting to finally make inroads. I think they just opened an academy in the Dominican Republic recently or something. So, that's not stuff that we'll see come to fruition on the major league field this year, obviously. Sure. But the Cuban connection has, that's long time coming, dating back to the days of Minnie Minoso. Obviously, you saw when they brought in Jose Abreu, a decade or so ago. The only other thing I wanted to say on the White Sox is, and you and I have talked about it, you mentioned the prospect thing, is that usually with a team this bad, the thing that people are going to look at is the Rookie of the Year market. Mm-hmm. Now, I don't actually see, the top prospects, the name brand prospects on the White Sox that might get playing time this year. I don't actually see a ton of value in the Rookie of the Year market. Say what you will about Colson Montgomery. I don't think that, in the 15 to 30 to 1 range, it's necessarily worth it. You mentioned Kyle Teal, their other catching prospect, Edgar Caro. It's more the long shots who are going to get playing time that are worth looking at in that market. You and I discussed recently Sean Burke. It really sounds like he's got almost locked into a rotation spot on opening day this year. 150 to 1 for Rookie of the Year at BetMGM. You and I both really like his stuff. I know that he's worked really well with Brian Bannister, their new pitching guru, and Ethan Katz, their pitching coach. And the other guy I wanted to mention was Chase Meadroth, one of the pieces that came over in the Garrett Crochet deal, kind of utility infielder. I think he's going to see a lot of run this year and just can kind of, accidentally hit his way into, a 300 average, just have a lot of value on the field. And in the average department, he could see himself in the Rookie of the Year race. Way more interesting than like the obvious top 100 guys, the Montgomerys, their new young pitching prospects, Hagen Smith, Noah Schultz, and Braden Montgomery, the other piece who came over in the Garrett Crochet deal. He's not probably going to be in the majors this year. But yeah, Burke, Meadroth are the guys who stand out to me, and I wasn't sure if I know you agree on Burke, if there's anything else there.
Yeah, Meadroth is really interesting. So Colson Montgomery, his high WAR projection in 527 plate appearances from Zips is 1. He has a 1.0 WAR projection. Chase Meadroth, 2.6 from Zips in 545 plate appearances. That ranks amongst the projected rookie leaders in the American League. I believe Jacob Wilson has the highest projection right now, getting that shortstop adjustment. Dominguez is over 2. Meadroth, seeing him over 2 on a projection really stands out. So that's an interesting name. I hadn't
100 to 1, 100 to 1 at Caesars. I believe Caesars is the only book offering him right now. It's 100 to 1. So yeah,
it's very interesting projection to see. As you said, a high contact guy. Very like similar strikeout and walk rates. He walked more than he struck out in the minors. His projected strikeout and walk rates in the majors for a rookie are phenomenal. Like a 13% strikeout rate, 16%, or reverse that, 13% walkout rate, 16% strikeout rate. So guy who's going to get on base a lot, going to put the ball in play a lot. I think a really interesting prospect in Chase Meadroth if he plays every single day. But let's move on from the bottom of this division because I'm sure people are sick of us talking about the Chicago White Sox. We're going to take this division, as I said, worst to first projected. So we're going to go to the Kansas City Royals at plus 300. Surprising playoff team. Last year, though, I did say coming into the season on this podcast, I thought the Royals would finish ahead of the Detroit Tigers because I really liked the sneaky offseason they had. And a lot of those moves ended up panning out. Seth Lugo, Michael Wacha. I don't see the depth on this team, though, that I not necessarily saw coming into last year. I just don't see a lot of depth on this team. If anybody on the major league roster gets hurt, they don't really have a lot of prospect depth to bring up and replace pieces. They don't really have a lot of prospect depth to trade for other major league pieces. The big move over the winter, trading Brady Singer for Jonathan India. They also signed Carlos Estevez to boost their bullpen slightly. It's a pretty good bullpen. They have some, key pieces. Cole Reagan's a Cy Young candidate. Bobby Witt, an MVP candidate. Salvi Perez is getting into his late 30s. The lineup isn't particularly deep. And as I said, if they sustain any injuries, I think there is downside in terms of depth on this team. But the bullpen is very good. If the bullpen stays together, that could carry them to close to a 500 record. Ultimately, I do go under and lean to miss the playoffs on this team. I projected them at about 79 wins, about 80 wins. The projection market out there between 78 and 82 wins. There's some other prop angles that I like on this team. Bobby Witt hits leader, Bobby Witt stolen base leader. I think Noah Cameron is going to pitch a lot for them. He's 100 to 1 for AL Rookie of the Year. But Colin, I want to get your thoughts first, and then I'll recap my thoughts on Witt hits leader because I think that's a really interesting prop. We cashed out at 30 to 1 last year, but you also have a player prop you like on this team as well with Salvador Perez. So give me your thoughts on the Royals in general, and then what you're betting in terms of Salvi.
Yeah, so I was given a little bit of pause when I was reading through your excellent team-by-team overview, which people can check out on actionnetwork.com and the Action app, because the Royals were kind of the team in this division that I was highest on. And part of that might have to do with the fact that I think that it's a rule that someone at Action Network named Colin has to be high on the Royals. But I really like the talent top to bottom, especially when you compare them to a team that we're going to talk about a little bit that you and I are going to disagree on, the Tigers. I think that, Bobby Witt is arguably the best player in this division, arguably the best player in the American League. I'm really excited to see if we finally get a Vinny Pasquantino breakout this year. Really big fan of him. And that rotation, like you mentioned, Reagans and Lugo is just an electric one, too, even if you expect some regression from Lugo this year. I like the bullpen. I like the way they mix and match. The one thing that I hadn't considered when I brought this up is, again, what people often don't think about when they're making these bets and projections is it takes more than 26 guys to win a division, to have a successful season in general. The depth is obviously a concern. I think that this is a team, though, that if they have good health fortune, is absolutely a contender, to win this division, in a wide open division. I did look for some other ways to attack this team because, like I said, I lean over. I don't know if that's like a locked in firm bet for me, but I did look at some player prop projections here to find something else on this team. I looked at a lot of individual over-unders in the home runs and strikeouts market, and some things stood out to me. I looked at public projections for 7 or 8 different avenues, Pacoda, and everything that Fangraphs offers, Zip, Steamer, ATC, The Bat, Oopsie, etc. Sal Perez's over-under right now is sitting at 22.5 home runs, minus 110 at Caesars. He had 27 last year. He hasn't gone under 22.5 in a full season since 2016. Obviously, the concern with Sal Perez is, when is his body going to finally break down? And he's just going to, only play 80 games, 70 games, and the Royals are going to have to look in a different direction to catcher. It hasn't happened yet. I'm going to keep betting on him until it happens. If you look at all of those 8 public projections I looked at, average them out, it comes out to 24.8 home runs. Oopsie has him at 27. I think the low is actually Pacoda at 23, which still goes over. So I think there's value on the over 22.5 home runs there for Sal Perez. And I also wanted to mention Cole Reagans in the strikeout over-under department. Over-under for him is sitting at 190.5. If you believe in the breakout in Cole Reagans, I think that there is good value on the over there. You average out the public projections there, you get about 200 strikeouts over a full season. Pacoda has him at 208. Oopsie's at 197, even on the low end. So the over-unders on individual players are obviously scary because, one injury for a month or two could sink the value. But if you're just looking at full season projections based on playing time, based on ability, the over on Sal Perez home runs, the over on Cole Reagans strikeouts. It was actually interesting. This wasn't an official bet, though, but Bobby Witt Jr.'s home runs was also on there. Over-under of 31.5. He hit 32 and 30 the last 2 seasons, so they're kind of splitting the middle there. The average out on Witt's home runs was 29.8, so it actually leaned slightly under there. That's not a play for me. It was a little bit too close. You could find him at 30.5 at one sports book, 31.5 at another sports book. So the lean there would be the under, but that's a stay away from me. Sal Perez home runs over, Cole Reagans strikeouts over. I really like, though.
Yeah, I lean over on both of those guys. I'll give you my average projections for both. I have Reagans at 203 strikeouts, range of 10. So that basically is a standard deviation where I put him between 193 and 213 over a season based on, and that factors in health, missing time potentially. Like, I know you mentioned the injury. It's tough to bet season long overs considering injury is a factor that you have to account for. Well, projections do account for injury and probability of injury. So that's all baked in already. So Reagans, I have a 203, as I said, on average. You're over 190.5 there. And then for Salvi, I have him averaging 25.2 homers, range of basically 21 to 30 is where his standard deviation range falls in. But 24 to 27 is sort of the median of that. So over 22.5 there. And then for Bobby Witt, I have Bobby Witt at 31.7 homers, ranging between 30.1 and 33, which is really more of a realistic range of like 27 to 36. So yeah, I think some upside in Bobby Witt's home run projection. I think he should add more power as he ages. I actually had him as a home run leader value bet at about 150, 200 to 1. I didn't end up giving it out publicly, but I threw a couple bucks on it just in the event that he has a massive home run season. I don't want to not have a ticket on it, but there is some interesting stuff correlated to that to talk about, which is Bobby Witt, stolen base leader at 20 to 1, because Bobby Witt stole 49 bases in 2023. That was third behind Corbin Carroll and Ronald Acuna Jr. Acuna is not going to run this year. Ohtani probably going to run less this year because he's pitching and not hitting as much. And Ellie De La Cruz, as I talked about on our NL Central podcast, new manager, Terry Francona's teams typically have not run as much as the Reds have run in a couple of years or the past couple of years. So I think there's a path if he's the hits leader, which I also like at 8 to 1, for Bobby Witt to be the steals leader at 20 to 1. But I do expect him to add more power to that profile as he continues to age. I'm not sure if he's going to get into the upper 40s in steals again. But I think in terms of this year, still worth betting into in his younger 20s. But the hits leader, I projected at plus 650. I like that down to plus 725. We bet that at 30 to 1 and cashed it last year. I project him as the favorite this year. I had him 6th on the leaderboard last year. And then just to recap, I think I prefer the Royals to miss the playoffs as opposed to their under. Every win total projection out there likes them to go under. There's a peak of 81.8 from ATC. You could bet under 83.5 out there. I'd take it down to 83. But every projection also sees them missing the playoffs at least 59% of the time, basically 60% of the time at more. And you can get listed odds of minus 135 out there. I'm happy to bet that up to minus 150, where the lower end of those miss the playoff projections are.
Would
Colin,
you bet,
any more thoughts on the Royals? Go ahead.
Yeah, just real quick, you mentioned Bobby Witt, the stolen base leader market. I didn't mention this because there was nothing notable there, but the individual player over-unders did have Witt stolen bases also, and the over-under was 32.5. Most projections lean over on that. Are you in line with that as well?
I'm at 36, between 32 and 39. So that's realistically between 25 and 46 steals, if you think about the standard deviation,
sure.
Which is a big range considering he could have a massive power season. He could just not run as much based on manager's instructions. So yeah, I'd lean over, but that's a tricky one just because if he starts hitting home runs, he's not going to give himself the opportunity to steal. So it's like you kind of have to choose either the home run prop or the steals prop. I probably wouldn't pick both, even though he could easily go 30-30.
Yeah.
Let's move on to and I've got a sneaky 30-30 guy I will give out on the AL West podcast, which we will also be recording today and which will release, I believe, on Thursday of this week. We're going to talk about the Cleveland Guardians, another team I bet last year. I bet them to make the playoffs. I bet them to win the AL Central. They ended up winning 92 games, Pythagorean expectation of 90. Their win total, though, this year down drastically to 82.5. And again, like the Royals, every public projection system out there likes this team to go under and to miss the playoffs. This is the biggest edge in the miss the playoffs bet of anything out there. But Coda gives the Guardians the best chance of making the playoffs. They still put them at plus 340, 22.7%. I like this up to minus 175 for the Guardians to miss. There are some awards bets I liked on this team, but I'd also bet they're under as well, 83.5 down to 82. A lot of losses. Josh Naylor, Andres Jimenez, Matthew Boyd, Alex Cobb, Scott Barlow. They brought in Carlos Santana. They brought in some arms to try to keep this roster afloat, but I just don't see them hitting nearly as much as they did last year. And I don't think the pitching is going to hold up after extended workload in 2024. So what are your thoughts on the Guardians coming to this year, Colin, and any props or awards bets you want to place on this team?
The Guardians are a team that have confounded me for years. I remember coming on this very podcast last year, and you and I talked about Guardians versus Twins. I was very, very heavy on the Twins. I was out on the Guardians. You said you showed value on the Guardians to win the division. Obviously, you were right. They are a team that, they're kind of in a quiet way, one of those anti-projections. They confound projections every year.
Sure.
And part of that's because they never spend. They rely a lot on their internal pitching development. And it works more often than not. 2023 is the only year in the last almost 15 years, 13 years that they had a losing record. Obviously, Terry Francona's gone now. Terry Francona was gone for a lot of last year as well. Or Terry Francona was gone last year. So it's year 2 without Terry Francona. I like their pitching. I like the front of their rotation. I'm a big, big Tanner Bybee fan. I believe that Gavin Williams is still going to be, a competent mid number 2, number 3 type starting pitcher. He didn't really show it last year, but I have a lot of confidence in his development. Behind him, there's a lot of question marks. Ben Lively pitched way over his head last year. I think that everyone's done waiting and hoping on Tristan McKenzie. They brought in Luis Ortiz from the Pirates, and their lineup just has a lot of guys you look at and you're like, that guy is starting for this team. It's Steven Kwan, incredible. Jose Ramirez, incredible. Juan Brito, is he going to be their starting second baseman? Maybe we get Kyle Manzardo lives up to his former prospect building. Brian Rocio lives up to his former prospect building. The aging corpse of Carlos Santana you mentioned is out there. That's actually in the player prop over-unders, that's the one guy that I single out. They have him, most markets have him at over-under 19.5 home runs. Seeing him around the 17-18 range, 16 to 18 range. Most projections market, so I do like the under there. But I am with you. I'm with you just in general on this Cleveland team. The under to miss the playoffs. I think this is a fourth place team in this division. I think Minnesota, Kansas City, Detroit are clearly better than them. And I fully expect them to prove me wrong and win 95 games because nothing makes sense with this organization.
I think Juan Brito is actually an interesting AL Rookie of the Year candidate at 75-1. As you mentioned, probably going to play every day at second base for them. He seemed to be the impetus for them trading away Jimenez. They felt comfortable giving him full playing time this year, and that's what they do in that organization. They, just like the A's, once a guy is approaching free agent status, they flip them on. I think Jimenez might have been signed, but always cycling out guys who make money for younger, cheaper players.
Yeah, once they start to hit those late ARB years, is basically it's Rays, it's Tampa Bay Rays light, basically, where they're not trading them like when they're hitting free agency, they're trading them when their ARB number starts to go up.
Exactly. It's what the A's would do when they had Josh Donaldson, that era of players. The moment they hit that second year of arbitration, 2 years left, that's probably when peak trade value comes. You're not trading a guy as a rental, you're trading him with 2 years left on the deal. It's probably the most optimal time teams like the shop players. Chase DeLauder, 35-1 AL Rookie of the Year. This team is desperate for hitting. DeLauder, Manzardo. I don't think Manzardo's a rookie. He played enough last year, but you're going to see these younger guys come up, get opportunities to hit. As you talked about with the Carlos Santana under, Colin, I have him as low as 15 homers, as high as 18. So again, anywhere between like 12 and 21, I think is a fair range of outcomes for him this year, but downside projection, average of 17. What was the over under there?
19.5.
Under.
Yeah.
Under on Santana.
Bet MGM, I believe. The one guy I like on this roster, who's not projected to start right now, but he's kind of just like a my guy kind of guy for all of his inherent flaws, is John Kenzie Noel. Really like the talent there. I think that I hope that we get more of him this year in that first base DH role over guys like Manzardo or Will Brennan. I see a lot of upside there. Like if guys like that break out or guys like Juan Brito break out, that's where the path to the playoffs is with this team, along with Bybee and Gavin Williams panning out. Bybee actually has way shorter Cy Young odds than I thought. I think he's like around the 30-1. And like I said, I'm really high on him, but I'm not touching any of the awards markets on guys like that.
If you do like the Guardians this year, I do have a value bet to place on them. That would be Emmanuel Clase at plus 750 to be the Major League saves leader. I did project that closer to about plus 500. He has 30 more saves than any other pitcher over the past 3 seasons. He was the saves leader for MLB in both 2022 and 23. The Guardians were not good in 2023. He was second last season. So he's proven he can lead the league even when the Guardians aren't particularly good. My concern is the same as the concern with the rest of this Guardians bullpen fatigue. After last season, you saw Clase blow up multiple times in October. He didn't have a multi-run outing at any point during the regular season. He had 3 in the postseason, just didn't seem right, was struggling to get through hitters. So a bit worried about Clase fatiguing this season, that bullpen in general fatiguing this season after a lot of workload last year. Very similar thoughts about the Brewers in the NL Central. Let's go to a team that we have some disagreement on, because I believe you're lower on the Detroit Tigers than I am for this year. I'm the highest in market divisionally on the Tigers. I have them at about plus 218 to win the division. The average public projection out there has them closer to plus 250, which is roughly in line with their betting odds. I also show correlated value on the Tigers to make the playoffs and to win the AL pennant, and I do view them as an AL pennant contender just because of how they optimized their roster down the stretch last year and into October. I think they are a team who's going to outplay projections because AJ Hinch is using that pitching staff very aggressively. I think Jackson Joby has serious upside to become an ace in that Tarek Skubal mode. They could have a really nasty 1-2 punch by the end of the year. And I think Riley Green is a potential MVP candidate in the American League. May need to step up in terms of his skill set, but the overall talent is there. The player prop bet I like the most here, Tarek Scuba wins leader, projected that at plus 850. But high in this Tigers team, they added Gleyber Torres, Jack Flaherty. They brought him back. Added Alex Cobb, who's going to start the season on the IL, Tommy Conley, and Andrew Chafin to round out the bullpen. So beefed up the roster a little bit compared to what they had last year. Have some younger guys coming up who should continue to improve. I'm really high on Kerry Carpenter. Love Kerry Bonds. So tell me why you dislike this Tigers team coming off of a surprising 2024 campaign.
I have to separate my impartial analysis with my just pure hatred of this Tigers team. I am in a dynasty baseball league with a group of, they're all Tigers guys. They're all Detroit based. Some of them listen to this podcast. Shout out to the P4K guys. But I hate this Tigers team, and I think that they're being overvalued based on that second half last year. Maybe there is something to your roster optimization by AJ Hinch, but part of it I think is just that some of these guys were playing a little bit over their heads, and I think that maybe they come back down to earth this year and turn back into pumpkins. Like, I can't believe that. I look at the roster and the playing time projections for this team, and I see guys like Trey Sweeney and Wenzel Perez. Matt Vierling was like a godsend for them last year, and I'm like, they're really relying on him this year. How did this team not sign Alex Bregman? I know they made a longer-term offer than the Red Sox. They went into hardcore, like, Mets level, we tried when they didn't sign him. But like, that was a team, especially with AJ Hinch, his old manager there, that like this team, if they got Bregman, they would be like hands down the favorite in this division. I love Riley Green. I'm right there with you. I think if I were going to make a positive bet, or probably any bet on this Tigers team, it would be Riley Green to win the MVP. Because if you look at a script of the Tigers winning 90 plus games and winning this division, I don't see a way that happens without Riley Green turning into a superstar, like starting center fielder in the All-Star game, 7+ wins above replacement. As a center fielder, that will add a lot to his WAR total if his defense pans out there, especially for voters who just look at the WAR leaderboard and sort down. This dude has an immense amount of talent. He's still very young. He's 24 and a half years old. But the rest of the roster around him is just very, very questionable. Their catchers are good defensively, but they're among the worst offensive players in the majors. Jake Rogers, Dylan Dingler, they still have Javi Baez around. They're going to rely on guys like Justin Henry Malloy, Zach McKinstry. Maybe they get a Colt Keith breakout. They've kind of been jerking him around defensively. I guess he's going to play first base now. Spencer Torkelson is completely out of the picture there. And the other guy I like on this team that I'm with you on is Kerry Carpenter. I've invested in him heavily from a fantasy perspective. The one thing that I don't understand, especially with a team that is so starving for offense, is like, play him more. Like, let him hit against lefties. Like, he's better option against left-handed pitching than Andy Ibanez or whomever. Like, I think that he needs to be an everyday player because the dude can crush, and you can't get better against lefties unless you play against lefties. Obviously, Skubal is incredible. The one player prop that I'm looking at is MGM has his over-under on strikeouts listed at 197.5. Very high on the over there for the defending Cy Young winner. Most public projections average out to about 215 strikeouts over a full season. So 197.5, the over there, that's like insane value. That's probably my favorite of all these over-unders, along with one other twin that we'll get to later. But yeah, I hate disagreeing with you because this feels very much like our Guardians Twins disagreement last year. I'm on the Royals. I'm anti-Tigers. You're on the Tigers. You're anti-Royals. We'll see if you're right again this year, but I just think what this team did in the second half last year was incredible. I think they gave their fans a thrill ride. I think they're going to turn into a pumpkin again this year.
Yeah, fair enough. 97 win pace in the second half. Absolutely could underachieve this season. They got the benefit, of some good luck, and also just like the other pitching staffs I mentioned, Cleveland, Milwaukee, they could wear down this season. I do think they brought in some fresher arms. They also just have a little bit more depth than those other teams that I mentioned. They didn't push it for the entire season either. They pushed it for half a season and into the playoffs. One thing that I really think went under the radar with this Tigers team, and mentioning guys like Trey Sweeney, they were a much, much better defensive team in the second half than they were in the first half. Minus 10 in April as a team, which was, I believe, one of the worst in baseball. Plus 9 in July, plus 5 in August, plus 5 in September as a team in terms of outs above average. We're one of the best teams in the second half over the final 3 months of the season defensively. So pitching, defense, offense obviously doesn't have a lot of pop or a lot of upside. Maybe they play Kerry Carpenter a little bit more against lefties this year. His career splits are not great, but he also has been given about 1/6 of the opportunities against lefties as he has against righties. And desperate for more offense, knowing how good of a hitter he is, yeah, maybe he platoons less this season. But if you can play in daily fantasy leagues, Kerry Carpenter about as elite of a target platoon bat as you're going to find out there.
That is a Dinger Tuesday favorite too. Dinger Tuesday favorite, Kerry Carpenter. Like, you look at the home run markets, you pick the matchups with him, and you can profit a lot. I actually feel bad a little bit. I should have mentioned, shitting on Trey Sweeney a little bit. That's Eastern Illinois alum. It's not very often I get to bring up my alma mater on a podcast, but a guy who actually made the majors, and I'm over here like, yeah, they're relying on this asshole. Yeah, he's very good defensively, obviously.
Kerry Bonds as well, 118 WRC plus at home, 154 on the road. Detroit, a very difficult place to hit, very difficult to pull the ball out of that park. Kerry actually has a number of opposite field home runs, which is why I like him as a hitter in general. Guy that size, able to put the ball out to the opposite field, has some serious pop. But as Colin mentioned, those Dinger Tuesday bats, particularly when the Tigers are away from home on Tuesday, he's much better away from Comerica. Slug 460 at home, 569 on the road throughout his career, 780 OPS versus 923. I think just that park kills his stats.
We do have a over-under on him, individual for home runs, 20.5 to 21.5 range. The public projections are right in line with that, so it's a no bet for me. But yeah, that's an interesting one too, especially if he starts playing a little bit more.
I like that Santana under we mentioned earlier, not only because of the projection, but also because of the guys around him who could steal playing time from him, his age. I think there's a lot of interesting angles on that one. Let's move to Santana's former team. That's the Minnesota Twins at plus 220 to win the AL Central. Colin's pick from last season. I'm at 82.7 wins this year. Their win total of 84.5. Public projection range of 83 to 86.8. As I mentioned, they lost Carlos Santana. Also lost Max Kepler, longtime outfielder. Caleb Thielbar, left-handed reliever. And then Kyle Farmer, a platoon bat. They brought in Ty France, Harrison Bader, and Danny Kalum, but really no additions for this team who didn't spend money last year, not willing to spend money this year. I believe they might have new ownership. You would know better than I, but they haven't invested in this team whatsoever. However, there is a lot of pitching depth here. There's a lot of name brand talent on this roster. I still think they can make the playoffs pretty safely with the roster that they have. The public projection market views them as a safe playoff team. Every single projection out there has them making the playoffs at least 50% of the time. The consensus closer to 58%, and you can bet them at plus money to make the playoffs. I took plus 120. So, Colin, what's your view of the Twins for this season? Do you like them to win the division? Do you like them to make the playoffs? Any player prop bets you like for this team? I know there's one home run total you like.
Yeah, I do like the Twins. I usually like the Twins. I think that they are, top to bottom, probably the most talented team in this division. I think that the fact that this division is so bad makes it tough to bet on them because you're always getting them priced as the favorite or close to the favorite. You mentioned the ownership thing. They're for sale right now. They're not. Justin Ishbia, the owner of the Phoenix Suns and Phoenix Mercury, was in discussions to buy them and then pulled out. He's actually now in discussions to potentially become more involved in the White Sox. Coincidentally, he's a minority owner of them right now. But yes, the Pohlad family still owns them, but they are for sale. So that could change things financially for them considerably. I think that the Twins have less glaring weaknesses than most of the other teams in this division. But at the same time, they have less star power. It's like the Royals and Tigers with Bobby Witt Jr. and Riley Green probably have a better,
And
front line
Struble and Reagans too.
yeah, frontline offensive players, frontline aces than the Twins have. If your best offensive player for the Twins is, Carlos Correa or Royce Lewis, whoever you want to say, their ace is Pablo Lopez. I'm taking the Royals and I'm taking the Tigers in that case. But you go on down the roster, and I like a lot more things about the Twins. I think that they have competent major leaguers at every position. If Ty France can be what he was in Seattle once upon a time, Royce Lewis stays healthy over the course of a full season. I'm not going to say if Byron Buxton stays healthy over the course of a full season because that's foolish. And
They
then also
signed Bader to back him up. It's not Michael A. Taylor anymore.
that's true.
They have him a little bit more depth. They have Emmanuel Rodriguez now if he gets hurt. Like if a Buxton injury doesn't kill them as much as it used to.
The fact that Edouard Julien and Jose Miranda are on the bench, like Christian Vasquez, those are some solid backups. Those are guys who starting once upon a time, and also behind Pablo Lopez. I like their top three in the rotation a lot. Maybe their top four. It gets really questionable beyond that. I don't know what to think about Simeon Woods Richardson. Chris Paddock is an enigma to me, but I love Pablo Lopez, love Joe Ryan, love Bailey Ober. If Ryan can control his home run issues, I think that dude has ace level potential. He's shown flashes of being an ace in the past. And Joan Duran in the back end of the bullpen is obviously really good. I think behind him, the bullpen gets a little bit questionable. If that might be an area of weakness. I'm hedging a lot. I'm saying a lot without it making a really firm pick here. I think that they are the favorites to win the division for a reason. I think if I were picking a team to win the division, it would be them. Am I personally betting them to win the division? Am I personally betting their win total over? No, I'm not. I'm once again going to the player prop market here. I mentioned Byron Buxton here. This has got to be the scariest bet anyone would ever make. His home run total over under is 18.5. Byron Buxton could fall down the stairs tomorrow and be out until August because that's how Byron Buxton works. He is the ultimate, well, if he just stays healthy, guys. Can you believe he's 31, by the way? Like, doesn't it seem like just yesterday he was this top prospect, what could be kind of guy? Now he's 31 years old. Anyway, his over-under on home runs, 18.5. The over, minus 110 at Caesars. You mentioned these models, they consider injury risk.
Yep.
With someone like Buxton, you're obviously going to consider injury risk. Even despite all of that, you average all them out, not including yours, which you're going to tell me about in a second, you get about 22.6 home runs for Buxton this year. So you're going over by about 4. Buxton has been injured a lot over his entire career, basically. Despite that, he played only 102 games last year. He hit 18 home runs.
Yeah.
He played only 85 games in 2023. He hit 17 home runs. Like, even if this guy misses almost half the season, he's still got a chance to go over this. And then you look at the potential of maybe he plays 110 games. Maybe he plays 120 games. I'm not going to go beyond that because that's probably absurd. But if that guy plays 90 to 100 games, he could still go over this. And then the upside is through the roof. I feel like for 5 years straight, I was like, oh, my MVP sleeper is Byron Buxton. I'm not doing that anymore. That's insane. But if you look at his individual over-under, 18.5, I love the over here because even if he gets injured, he can still go over because he's got that much power upside.
Yeah, it was the pandemic shortened 2020 season that got all of us sucked back in again. 39 games, Buxton hit 13 homers that season. Then he followed that up with 19 and 61 in 2021. I mean, his rate stats are incredible. When he's on the field, he performs. The problem has been staying on the field. But yeah, I'm between 21 and 28 homers. The oopsie projection is at 28 for Buxton. The low is 19 from Zips. The games played projections between 95 and 118.
Pacoda is also at 19 on him.
Okay. Yeah. So I think the over there is fine. Think of all the ones you mentioned on the show: Buxton home run over, Skubal K's, Reagan's K's, Salvi home runs, Santana under home runs. I think Skubal K's and Santana under showed the biggest edge. Just probably the two I'm most interested in. You have the Skubal arm injury thing from 2 years ago to consider, but he's also throwing harder in spring this year. Was able to make it through a season fully healthy last year. Didn't really show any injury concerns. So I think Skubal pretty safe. I like Skubal for wins leader as well. And then that Santana under I think is very interesting too. This Twins team, it's really the pitching depth for me. I know you said you were concerned about the arms in the back end of the rotation, but I like Zebby Matthews a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I like Matt Canarino. David Festa is doing some new interesting things in spring this year. They have a lot more pitching depth to me than they had last year. I think this team probably ultimately does win the division. I basically have a bet on them to make the playoffs at plus money, which would counteract, as I'm knocking my mic out of the way, that would counteract my AL Central bet on the Tigers. So if the Twins end up winning the Central, I think I profit like, a tenth of a unit. They also have some hitting prospects too. Lee Keyshaw, he was injured coming out of college. He's a really high floor guy. I think people actually expect him to get to the majors this year. Brooks Lee is projected as their opening day second baseman.
Well, Brooks Lee
drafted really high out of Stanford. He was considered the best bat in that draft. It's a little awkward having Ty France as their starting first baseman right now. Like, I feel like Miranda and like Edouard Julien are better options than him.
Yeah.
But if that's your biggest hole, first base, like you're doing pretty okay. Walker Jenkins too, also one of the top prospects in the minor leagues. He could make the jump to the big leagues this year. He ended last year at Double-A, smoking his way through the minors. And I mentioned Emmanuel Rodriguez as well. So there's a lot of prospect depth on this team. They're probably not going to trade these prospects for other major league pieces. But if guys get hurt, they have a lot of young, exciting guys who they can bring up and supplement those holes. So yeah, I think this Twins team is actually much better than the team headed into last year, much deeper, even though they didn't really spend a lot of money. Their prospects are just ready to graduate all at the same time.
If you told me that like their two best players are also the two biggest injury risks, like if Buxton and Royce Lewis play 50 games each, then this team's not winning the division. If they play 100 plus games each, then this is a World Series contender. Like, I know that baseball's not an individualistic sport, but like those guys are so important to this team and so injury prone that what those guys do is like so integral to the success or failure of this team.
Lewis played 82 games last year. That was a career high. Don't forget about Carlos Correa as well, Colin. Carlos only played 86 games last year. The Giants refused to sign him because of the pre-existing injuries he has. The Twins ultimately agreed to the contract, but he's got injuries that he'll have to deal with and navigate for the rest of his career. He was great when he played last year, but still only played about half a season. And even in the past 3 years, the max he's played is 135 games. So you're going to lose, 40 games from Buxton, 30 games from Correa. I don't know. Lewis, at least 20, 30 games, right? Is Lewis going to play more than 130 games? Probably not. So yeah, it's about filling in the holes. And maybe it's almost like an NBA thing where you can't take all the stars off the floor at the same time. Like, can they stagger the injuries enough so that, at least like one or two of them are always in there? If they all get hurt at the same time, it's going to collapse. But
yeah, that sounds really familiar as a snake-bitten White Sox fan with the years of Moncada and Eloy and Robert. And it's let's get them all on the field healthy at the same time. And obviously, this team is a lot more competently built. But
just only one of you is allowed to be injured at one time. Once one of you comes back, somebody else is allowed to get hurt and take some time off. But let's stagger these injuries a little bit when we get to the end of the season. Colin, that was great stuff. Thank you for joining me. And with Major League Baseball right around the corner, now is the perfect time to get yourself an Action Pro account. Get real-time pick alerts from myself and other Action Network experts, including Sean Kerner's strikeout prop projections and more. Right now, new subscribers can get $20 off of a year of Action Pro at actionnetwork.com/pro and use promo code POD20. That's promo code POD20 for $20 off an entire year. So be covered for March Madness, NBA, the upcoming baseball season, and it'll take you through next college and football and NFL seasons as well. So don't wait. Visit actionnetwork.com/pro right now. Use promo code POD20 to get $20 off a year of Action Pro. And that'll do it for this episode of Payoff Pitch. Make sure to download the free award-winning Action Network app to follow all of our action experts so you can track your own picks. Don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe to catch all of our divisional previews on the Payoff Pitch feed. For Colin Woodchurch, I'm Sean Zerillo. Thank you for tuning in. We'll see you next time.